Good morning.
Good morning.
The name of this sermon is A Scout Returns Home. It is my great pleasure to speak with you this morning, and I'm grateful to Dean Walker for the invitation and for the fine work of the worship committee. As it happens, I spoke in Divinity School Chapel once before on September 29th, 2009, when I was a third-year student here. I decided that I would make today's sermon a sequel to that one, just so I can maybe be on record as the longest sermon series in Baptist history. 14 years. I mean, maybe that's not the record, but it's got to come close, right? Now, as you may remember in my last sermon, and by you all, I basically just mean Neil and Jill. But in all seriousness, this sermon is a sequel to that one, because that sermon was about calling. What is it? How do you know if you got it? Do I want it? And I doubt that the issue of calling is any less relevant to Divinity School students in the year of our Lord 2023 than it was all the way back in 2009. If anything, I suspect it's even more freighted, more fraught than it was back then. So consider me, if you will, a scout returning from the future, like the scouts returning from the promised land, here to give you a report of what I've seen and experienced, because I'm here to tell you there is milk and honey. It is a land of plenty, but it is a wild, uncertain, and dare I say it, to use Dr. Sampson's word, risky, if not dangerous place. So a recap from the last sermon, for those of you who were not here. Last time I talked about two different models of calling. One type is modeled when I trained my dog to come when I called her. Now first I had to teach her to stay. Then to teach her to come, I would gradually back away from her, saying stay, stay, stay. And then finally I would say, come. And then when she came to me, I would give her a treat. Through withholding treats and backing away, I taught her to come when I called. That's the first type. The second type of calling I saw modeled a long time ago at a family gathering at somebody's swimming pool. My cousin's little boy Chase was still at the age where every spring, the spring of every year, he would have to be coaxed to get in the water. First, he had to be coaxed to get in the steps of the pool. Then he had to be coaxed to get off the bottom step and into the shallow end of the pool. Later on in the afternoon, I saw them putting him halfway up the slide and letting him come down into his dad's arms. That took a while. Then they put him at the top of the slide, and even though he stayed up there a long time and almost came back down the ladder, eventually he came down the slide. Finally, late in the afternoon, not long before dinner, they had the boy on the diving board with his dad treading water in the deep end, saying, come on, Chase, you can do it. And he did. And at various points in the afternoon, I would think to myself, why are they pushing that kid to do things he doesn't want to do? And at the end of the day, as they were headed for the car, I heard Chase say with excitement in his voice, wow, what a day, I got to do all the things I wanted to do. That's how God calls us. Not like me training my dog to come when I call by withholding treats and backing away from her, but like my cousin who patiently called his son into doing the things the son wanted to do but was afraid of. That part I affirm 100%. That part has not changed one bit. So what's changed in 14 years? Besides me, I guess. I think the biggest thing that's changed in those 14 years, at least as far as things are relevant in the context of ministry, is, let's be honest, a sense of hopelessness and despair that settled into those working in Christian churches. 14 years ago, we had certainly heard of the quote-unquote nuns, so labeled by demographers for their lack of religious affiliation. We had heard of those claiming to be spiritual but not religious. But we were naive enough to think that those things would only affect the margins. We thought that we would still be able to find a place in the church. We thought that our sense of calling meant that we would be immune. that we, the students of Wake Forest School of Divinity, would be able to help our individual churches not hit the shoals upon which so many legacy churches were sure to founder. But when the world is changing so fundamentally that it sometimes seems the earth has opened up and swallowed segments of our economy and society whole, friends, there may be no safe harbor. Now, I'm not as convinced as some are that we are in an age of post-denominationalism. But I do think that we will not see again in our lifetimes Christianity having a position of unquestioned hegemony in our nation. Yeah, definitely. In the year 1957, Knollwood Baptist Church was founded. It had a membership of 99. In 3 years, membership at Knollwood grew from 99 to over 700. Sunday school enrollment was 585, with Sunday school attendance regularly reaching 400, and training union, something that most of y'all have never even heard of, evening Sunday school we could call it, that attendance was over 160. Friends, I haven't been to Knollwood since I've been back in Winston-Salem, but I'm pretty sure they're not hitting those numbers. Friends, those days are gone. So what does that mean for those of us who feel called to devote our lives to full-time ministry? At this point, let me turn to the psalm that I selected for the text today, Psalm 85. Psalm 85 is generally considered to be a psalm from the post-exilic period, by which I mean after the Jews returned from the period of Babylonian exile in the mid-6th century BCE. To recap the situation, many of you will remember that Judah fell to the Neo-Babylonian Empire in what I believe was the winter of 586-587, leading to the complete dislocation of the population. When I say dislocation, that's a sanitary word, but think of the trail of tears of indigenous tribes here in the U.S. in 1838, or the plight of the Armenians in 1915 at the hand of Ottoman Turks. But as recounted in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, in 539, the Jews were allowed to return home, at least the ones who wanted to do so, hence the phrase post-exilic. As recounted in the Hebrew Bible and corroborated by contemporary scholarship, however, the quote-unquote promised land that the Jews returning from Babylon actually returned to was, shall we say, not entirely as advertised in the travel brochures. It was a wasteland. Ruins. Imagine how heartbreaking it was to return to rubble. So how did the Jews who returned to their ancestral homeland respond? Well, I'm sure some of them just gave up, declared it all a pipe dream, and went on about their lives. And that's fine. We all do what we have to. But at least some of the Jews who returned rolled up their sleeves and got to work. It wasn't what they'd been told it would be. It wasn't glamorous or sexy. I'm sure it felt like a Pyrrhic victory they had won from Cyrus, the ruler who let them return if they wanted to. But they got to work. Among the wonderful things about Hebrew poetry is its typical parallelism. I'm referring to the way that a particular idea will be introduced in one line of a psalm and then in the next will either be reversed or intensified. And we see that here. In fact, in almost every single one of the verses in that psalm contains two clauses that read in parallel to one another. Looking at the most famous verse of this psalm, verse 10, which reads, "Mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed one another." We can see this, and not just in the development from meeting in the first half of that line to kissing in the second. The Hebrew text of this verse, forgive the mangled pronunciation, chesed ve'emet nifgashu, tzedek v'shalom nishaku. Four nouns might sound familiar to those of you who have had Hebrew. Hesed, emet, tzedek, and shalom. So righteousness, truth. Mercy or covenantal loyalty, truth, righteousness, and peace are arguably four of the most important thematic motifs in the Hebrew Bible. But as I will say, as is commonly known among students of Hebrew, mercy, as the King James Version translates the first word, is not a very good translation of hesed. Rather, following the foundational work of Catherine Dubs-Sackenfeld, the idea is rather covenantal loyalty. Similarly, I think many of us are aware that the Hebrew concept of shalom is not merely freedom from conflict, but rather robust human flourishing. Plugging these better translations into the verse gives us something really interesting. Loyalty and truth are met together. Righteousness, or here we might substitute piety, and human flourishing will kiss one another. Notice the tension between these two sets of concepts. Loyal intention will meet reality. Righteousness, or an almost chilly piety, we might even say the word duty, and radical human flourishing will kiss one another. It's almost an eschatological vision, isn't it? But this is not a pie in the sky, Jesus brought a casserole kind of eschatological hope. It is a hard-won, faith-filled hope that the faithful will be made true, that duty will somehow, against all reason, be transmuted into life. Not because we earned it. There is no causation here. But somehow there is a meeting, a kissing even, of paradoxical concepts. So we do our part, we follow the call to jump in the water, to get off the steps, to go down the slide, and yes, even jump off the diving board, waiting for the arms of God to somehow catch us. We follow the call despite all our fears, and because of that, we get to do all the things we wanted to do. Leaning into this tension, though, this eschatological paradox, I'd like to shift gears a second and tell you about one of my all-time favorite movies, Babette's Feast. It's from 1987. It's also a short story, by the way, by Karen Blixen. In the movie, which is set in Denmark in the 19th century, in the middle of a strict religious community, there is a young military officer, last name Lovenheim. He had such big dreams as a young man. And when he joined the military, he found that he was able to climb the social ladder by becoming attached to the royal court. Near the end of his life, he finds himself invited to a feast. As he's putting on his clothes, his dress uniform, he looks at himself in a full-length mirror, and he sees a vision of his younger self. He has a sense of regret, of heaviness, where the choices he made in life to choose a life of military service and courtly climbing worth it? Did he ever get over losing a romantic interest who spurned him in his youth? What would his younger self, so full of dreams and ambition and optimism, have made of the person he turned out to be? So he goes to the feast, prepared by the French chef of the title of the movie and short story, Babette, which is depicted in such sumptuous detail in the film. And he appreciates every single bite of the food, every sip of the wine. It is very clearly a symbol of the messianic feast depicted in the Gospels. A feast to which we are all invited. At the end of the feast, he is moved to give a toast. He stands up, quoting Psalm 85, and says these words: "Mercy and truth, my friends, have met together. Righteousness and bliss shall kiss one another. Man, my friends, is frail and foolish. We have all been told that grace is to be found in the universe. But in our human foolishness and short-sightedness, we imagine divine grace to be finite. For this reason we tremble. We tremble before making our choice in life, and after having made it, again, tremble in fear of having chosen wrong. But the moment comes when our eyes are opened and we see and realize that grace is infinite. Grace, my friends, demands nothing from us but that we shall await it with confidence and acknowledge it in gratitude. Grace takes all to its bosom and proclaims general amnesty. See, that which we have chosen is given to us. And that which we have refused is also and at the same time granted us. Aye, that which we have rejected is poured upon us abundantly. For mercy and truth have met together, and righteousness and bliss have kissed one another. And so, my sisters, brothers, siblings in Christ, know that you have been called to get to do all the things in life that you wanted. Know that there is work to be done in the world that requires us to roll up our sleeves to do it. Know that we fellow workers in the field, those of us who are part of the greater Wake Forest School of Divinity community, thank God for the remembrance and hope of every one of you, are praying for you, and are confident that the one who began a good work in you will continue to complete it. But wear this calling lightly, for it is not through our efforts that the world is healed, but through God's grace. Grace that, though we experience now, is so wrapped up in eschatological vision and paradox that we may never see it in our lifetimes, the full fruits of our labors. But have faith in your heart, like the psalmist, that mercy and truth will meet together, that righteousness and peace will kiss one another. Amen. Amen.